right. So I've got a question for everybody out there. Do you believe in the afterlife? Do you believe in spirits and ghosts? That's not what this podcast is about, but it does have something to do with it because have you ever had one of those situations where you're trying to find something and you swear that you put it on the counter or, you're on your dresser or wherever it is and whatever it is, but you go to get it and it's not there. You don't see it. And then you start looking around everywhere and you're like, I swear I put it on the dresser. You go back and you don't see it and you walk around the house, you're looking everywhere and you're about to give up and you think to yourself, I'm going to go back again and follow my steps. So you go back to the dresser or the table or the desk or wherever you may have put whatever it is. And there it is. It's there. You got to ask yourself, has it been there that entire time? Or was there some mystical, weird thing that was happening, that was at play, and that was playing with you? I mean, it's happened to me, and it happens to me on a regular basis. Maybe I'm going a little senile because I'm getting older, but I kid you not, this did happen just a few days ago. And I looked for 15 minutes. I looked in the same area over and over and over. And when I was about to give up, I said, I'm going to go look one more time. I went back there. All I did was move one thing, and there it was. Right where I thought it was from the very start of all of this. And I swear, I kid you not, it was not there until I was going to give up. So have you ever had that feeling? Has that ever happened to you? The reason I bring this up is today's guest is Laura Buchwald, and you can find her at Laura Buchwald, and that's LauraBuchwald.com. We're going to talk really about her book, the Book of Reservations. However, my first question to her is, do you believe in afterlife? Because I think some of us, if we do, they can have an influence on our everyday lives or the things that we do. So please sit back. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Listen, like, comment, and share. And please remember, if you're a pet owner, be responsible and have your pet spayed or neutered. All right, let's get right into it. What has led you to believe in the afterlife?
Sure. Well, I've always believed in something. I was raised without a religion. I have to think that plays a bit of a role into it because I was not raised with any real teachings about what happens after or, what is beyond this world. My sister and I believe that the house that we grew up in is haunted. We both had nothing shocking, but we would just get feelings in certain parts of the house. It just felt like there was this palpable energy there. And then in the early 2000s, I went to my first ever spiritual medium. I had lost a couple of friends in fairly quick succession, and it would be nearly impossible to be a skeptic after what I experienced. This was in the days greatly preceding social media. You couldn't Google me and learn that I was connected to any of the people who came through with this medium. And the specificity of the information that he was turning over was shocking to me, shocking and greatly comforting.
I know a few people who have actually sought out mediums. Mm-hmm. And that's one thing that they had said is that the answers that were provided to them were comforting.
Yes. And I know people have misgivings about going to a medium or a psychic because they're afraid of getting bad information. Spiritual mediums and psychics some psychics have mediumistic abilities, but not all do. Mediums are there to connect us with our departed loved ones. And I've never heard of a medium, and I've asked all of the ones I've met with over the years, if they've ever experienced something where a spirit has a negative message for somebody, and that does not seem to happen. So what I've gotten that's comforting is just the validation that my loved ones are still, their energy is still here in some format. It's and I of course recognize why people would be skeptical. I I say all of this with a grain of salt, but I choose to believe, and I've had more positive experiences with spiritual mediums than, than unconvincing ones. I've never had a negative experience.
That's a positive thing. That's good.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
and like you said, I'm glad you kind of mentioned the fact that there is a difference between psychics and mediums. So,
Hmm.
but we won't dive into that part because we want to find out about you, your book. So I'm going to take a leap of faith and say that
Okay.
your experience that you had, you and your sister early on with the ghost in the house,
Hmm.
hence your trilogy, Ghost Table, right? The Ghost
Hmm.
Table.
The Ghost Table Trilogy, yes.
Is that what partially prompted you to write this?
Well, partially. It's that belief system that prompted me.
Mm.
At around the time in the years right before I started writing this, I had a number of experiences where I would walk into a room or walk into a building and feel a similar feeling to what my sister and I did in our house that we grew up in. Just a feeling of an extra kind of energy there. Uh, so the restaurant that inspired this trilogy, it was a real restaurant in Lower Manhattan in Greenwich Village. Um, I was spending a lot of time there. It was my neighborhood place back in the day. And one day I started getting that feeling, and I can almost conjure it when I talk about it now. But I half jokingly asked the bartender if their restaurant was haunted, particularly the ladies' room, which was on the second floor. And he kind of laughed and said, yeah, a lot of people have said that it is over the years. So this is a very old building that's been a bunch of restaurants. It was a speakeasy during Prohibition. It's, had a lot of people pass through its doors over the years. And, if a building is going to be haunted, it's a prime one for that, an old place that's seen a lot of visitors and played different roles throughout history. So it was the idea of this haunted restaurant and this staff sort of coexisting with whatever else is going on in there that inspired this series.
Okay. Yeah, because I was going to ask you in your novel, your books, there's supernatural,
Hmm.
uh, there is mystery, and I was going to ask you because there is a difference to me between romance and romantic. Now, is there a mix of both in there possibly?
There are romantic elements. It is not a romance. It does not belong on the romance shelves. That is a very specific genre. Under the romance umbrella, there are myriad, variations on a theme, but that is not a genre that I write. Uh, my book, it's marketed as upmarket fiction, which has elements of commercial and elements of literary fiction. And
Okay.
so it's not genre specific. There are paranormal elements. There's nothing scary. It's not, they don't even really question the existence of spirits because spirits are just their characters in the books. Um, so they're a given, it's been described as grounded, which I deeply appreciate because I know, you hear the word ghost, people have,
Yeah.
it's a very polarizing word I've found in discussing my books. People either are instantly drawn and want to tell me their stories and tell me about the houses they grew up in, or they're just like, nope, it's not for me. And I
Yeah.
certainly respect that. So that it can exist and be grounded at the same time, I think I'm very grateful that I was able to achieve that in some people's eyes.
Thanks for clarifying. And just to let folks know, for me on that romance and romantic, to me, the romantic part about it is the notion, the idea of this spirituality type of thing,
Sure.
um, where it's this void that you can either walk through and experience,
Hmm.
but it's there. And to me, that is what is romantic about books in general and in reading.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I love that. Yeah, and there is something so romantic about the idea that our loved ones are still here, that that death is not the end, and that we, a lucky minority I assume they're lucky, can communicate with, with those in the afterlife. So yeah, there is something romantic there. Also, I should have mentioned earlier, in terms of what inspired the Ghost Table
Yeah.
Trilogy, there is a restaurant that I love in New Orleans that sets a table every night for their resident ghost. And, New Orleans is a city that has a beautiful connection to their spirits, to their departed loved ones. They celebrate life as their mourning death. Um, and I loved the idea of honoring a space's resident ghosts by setting a table for them every night. So that is what, by this book, the Book of Reservations, that is what my protagonist does, is she sets a table in her restaurant for departed loved ones and people who were connected to the space over the years.
That was my next question. You're reading
Oh,
my mind.
well, wow.
No, it's. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I was going to say it's the ghosts are helping me read your mind, I guess.
It is something spiritual. It's that's the interesting thing is I don't want to say that we get into this habit of doing certain things like that, like so the restaurant in New Orleans, and it's a play on a joke for some, but
Hmm.
for others it's a serious thing where I think once again we used that word comfort earlier. It's
Hmm.
comforting to think and to know that there is a possibility of your loved one who is still visiting you or that
Hmm.
spirit. I too have experienced that in an older home that I owned. So
Oh,
I
okay.
know what you're talking about. But like I said, we're not here to talk about nor demystify any of that kind of stuff. Um, now, I want to ask you, when you were writing this book, or even when you
Hmm.
first started, you said that you first entered a contest, just like a one pager type of thing,
It was the first chapter
the
contest.
first
Yes.
chapter contest,
Hmm.
Uh, and it's pretty much remained intact as your first chapter and led into this trilogy.
The first the first paragraph is almost verbatim what I had written back then, and I've written and rewritten it so many times and read it so many times I can practically recite the first couple of chapters for you, but I will spare you that. Um, so, I wrote The Coat Check Girl as a standalone novel. I didn't
Okay.
intend for it to have a sequel, and when the opportunity came my way, my publisher Ronan Weatherford, gave me a contract to write a trilogy. It was such a gift and an opportunity. These characters stayed with me for a reason over so many years. So to be able to live in their world for a bit longer uh, was really not something I had intended, and something that I really enjoyed. And people who have read or are reading the Book of Reservations have said, it feels like meeting up with old friends again, because it's some of the same main characters. It's certainly the same world as the first book. Uh, so the opportunity to write the trilogy came to me, and I'm really grateful for it. I'm working on the third book right now in the series, and it's with a sense of I'm excited to move on to other things, and at the same time, it's a little sad thinking that I'm going to end my version of these characters' stories. I'd like to think that on some plane they'll go on.
Can you give us a little story behind one or maybe two of the characters?
Well, my protagonist is Josie Gray, and she is a woman who was very, very close to her grandmother. When the first book, The Coat Check Girl, opens, she's just lost her grandmother, who was her best friend. She and her grandmother, when Josie was a child, she realized she had the ability to communicate with spirits. The house that she grew up in was haunted, inspired by real life events. And she was terrified of this ability and learned to shut it down. And then we fast forward a couple of decades, and she's just lost her beloved grandmother. She's going back to her job in a restaurant in Manhattan, and that ability to communicate with spirits just comes right back. And now she can't fight it any longer. And so in book one, she's really learning to accept it as a gift. And she finally does by the end of book one. Book two, she's fully ensconced in the spirit world. This is just a part of her life. She's a grounded person as well, but she just has this ability that to communicate with spirits. And now she has to grapple with living in a world and living with a partner that doesn't always believe in what she believes.
Mm.
And her partner is extremely resistant to, to the idea of the ghost. He lets her keep this ghost table at the restaurant, but kind of, as you said before, thinks of it sort of as a novelty more than anything else. So she has to, she starts in the Book of Reservations, spirits start to contact her because they have messages for the living. And so she has the dubious obligation to try to convey these messages to people all of whom don't want to hear from their departed loved ones or don't believe that such a thing is possible. So that is our protagonist. And she, interestingly, was not supposed to be my protagonist. She wasn't my original protagonist.
Oh.
And then she just started showing up in every scene I was writing. And I kind of stepped back and said, okay, this is now her story. So I guess it makes sense because, I don't have her level of ability, but I certainly have her level of interest in the afterlife. I do have a belief that, and again, I say it all with a grain of salt, but I do have a pretty strong belief. And so it sort of became an opportunity for me to explore what would happen if I did have a much deeper level of ability here. Yeah.
Laura, with what you're saying and how you're describing Josie, your protagonist in your book, sounds like what a lot of people go through. That what I mean by that is that denial part. It's happening, but they deny it.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and people will ignore, signs. And actually, I think I'm quoting my book right now, but people will ignore even, the clearest signs that are put right in front of us by our loved ones. Songs playing on the radio with uncanny timing, or mementos, or, initials that keep showing up. Or I have a friend who gets his mother sends him the same number. He sees this number everywhere. And, people try to talk themselves out of these things. I've had friends and family members talk to the same mediums that I have. And I've listened to some of these recordings because a lot of the mediums will record their sessions with you so that you can listen after and see if there was maybe a piece of information that wasn't quite clicking during the session. And this has happened to me afterwards. It's like, oh my God, how did I miss that that's so-and-so coming through? But because the way mediums operate, it's not so literal. They get their information in a variety of ways. They'll get images that they connect to, and they'll try to relay them and see how they can fit into the person that they're reading's life. Or some of them get visual, some of them get audible information. When it's not so precise and so literal and so neatly tied up into a box, your father John came through with your childhood cat Sylvester, it's when it's not quite that literal, people will talk themselves out of seeing the connections that are there. Somebody asked me yesterday what the sitter's role is when they visit a medium, and it's really to work with the medium to interpret the information and to see. It can be helpful to have a list of people you might hear from or might want to hear from, to see how, they might say this is a close friend of yours and it might be your brother. They're seeing that it's a peer and, a similar age and a peer, and somebody to whatever side to them signifies, a person of a similar age. And they might say, your best friend who lost their life, blah, 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 and that's your brother. But because they said friend, you don't make the connection that, oh, that's just they've misinterpreted what it is that the spirit is trying to convey.
Yeah, with mediumship, I kind of I've always likened it to a remote viewer or you personally taking a Rorschach test. You see this blob, but you are you're trying to decipher the image that you're seeing, and what you see might be different from somebody else, or the way you're trying to explain it. So I do understand what you're saying about that.
Yeah, that's an excellent analogy, actually, because it is like a Rorschach test. You have to interpret. The medium tries to interpret information, and then you have to interpret from the medium.
Hmm. And a lot of these things too, like you said, these clues that are dropped on us could be something like, and this is, I think, something we've all experienced. Not that it's a spirit from beyond or afterlife,
Hmm.
but something is misplaced or something is missing, something's gone, and you're going, where did it go? And then some people jokingly say, who took it?
Hmm.
Thinking that it may have been their grandparents or mom or somebody that they love that's passed on. But I think a lot of times that is a little bit of a clue or hint that, hey, they're there.
That's funny. That happened to me this morning, actually. Yeah, with a piece of jewelry that went missing within the past couple of weeks, and I just thought it was gone. It could have fallen off in a taxi. It could have fallen off on the street. I sat down on my floor to wrap a couple of Christmas presents, and there it was. And I've walked on this floor. This floor has been vacuumed since I lost it, and there it was. Just showed up right where I happened to sit. So I had that exact thought this morning.
Those situations are so unexplainable.
I agree.
Other than somebody from beyond,
Yes.
is communicating with you, playing a joke or just saying hi. Or again, like you said, we have to decipher, what does that mean? What did
Mm-hmm.
that piece of jewelry mean that it was missing for a little while? Did it have a significance to someone
Mm-hmm.
uh, that meant something to us? So,
Yeah. This felt very significant. So I'm glad you brought that up.
uh, I think, like we said at the beginning, there's something that's a spiritual thing that's at play here.
Absolutely. I believe that.
I do too, actually. Now I definitely do. uh, Now, in writing the books, like you said, originally you didn't mean for this to become a trilogy, but the opportunity presented itself.
Mm-hmm.
So, as a writer, how do you go from saying, okay, I'm starting out writing just a single book, and then all of a sudden it has to, or it becomes a trilogy? Is it difficult to continue on writing about the characters?
It isn't, or it hasn't been for me because my main characters, and I'm purposely not naming one of them because it's a bit of a spoiler to talk about a continuum from book one to book two to book three, but they're in very different places in each of these. And I have very clear ideas of where Josie, my protagonist, is in terms of her spiritual abilities. And that's what anchors the stories. So, what was interesting, I mean, book one, The Kochek Girl, was complete. And I did a little bit of revision once I knew that it was going to be the first in a trilogy, but, largely kept most of the details as they were. So book two then becomes beholden to some of the biographical information about my characters, certainly the backstory. And then it's an interesting exercise in how much backstory to repeat, how much to, because you want each book to be a standalone. I want people to be able to pick up the Book of Reservations. I mean, I'd love for people to read all three of them, but I want somebody to be able to pick up the Book of Reservations and enjoy it. And, a couple of the early reviewers who have read it did not read the first one. So that was really helpful. So it's you kind of have to come up with a formula for how much to repeat, divulge, remind readers of both books, so that there's familiarity and there aren't glaring loopholes and omissions and factual inaccuracies, but that you're not boring the people who read the first book by treading the same territory the second time around. And now with the third book in the series, the as yet unnamed third book that I'm writing, I'm realizing, a lot of the backstory from one is in the rearview mirror. It doesn't need to play into it in order for the story to advance. So it's been a very interesting process. Because of some of those details I was beholden to in the second book, I position things in the third, like I have my characters in the second book go to somebody's hometown, which had and I like to travel when I write if I can for research purposes. Had I known I was going to be doing that with book two, I might have given them a different hometown selfishly so that I had a different place to go visit. So I have a vague in book two, somebody is from California. We're not sure exactly where to, I don't know that I'm going to set any of book three in California, but I did that, with that in mind so that if I am fortunate enough to get to take a research related writing trip, that, I'm going to a place that I want to be and that I know people. And, yeah, it's been a really interesting process, though, uncovering just how much to carry forward and how much to leave in each book.
I bet. I just want to remind folks that I'm speaking with Laura Buchwald. You are the author. LauraBuchwald.com is your website. And we're talking about your the Ghost Table Trilogies. And the first book was The Coat Check Girl. And the second one that we're really talking about right now is,
it's all right. The Book of Reservations. Yes.
I just about forgot.
No, it's a lot of information.
Yeah. And then, of course, the unnamed third book has yet to come out. The reason I had asked about, is it difficult going from a standalone to a trilogy type of thing, is I wanted to ask you, is it best if you're a new writer to write something that is totally fictional or something that you are familiar with or that you have experienced? I know that might sound like a silly or simple question, but
no, not at
I know
all.
some writers or people who want to be writers, and I've had one write, it's about Sasquatch, and I can't remember the exact title, but it was, of course, completely fictional. And then another one who wrote something that's more of a type of a autobiography-ish.
Sure.
So,
Like a fictionalized memoir type of thing?
We'll say they stretched the truth a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah.
And they seem like they had a more difficult time than the total fiction.
I could definitely understand that, having worked with a lot of memoir writers and with people who have, as an editor, and with people who have written fictionalized memoir. That can be really challenging because everything that happens in your life is important to you and plays a role in your story and leads you to where you are right this moment. But that doesn't always make for great writing or great reading, rather. So, to feel one needs to adhere so much to what happened and to all of the details and everybody who is in a given scene can be limiting in a way that writing pure fiction cannot. And of course, fiction is going to be informed by what you know and what you've experienced. If you're writing about Sasquatch or if you're writing something set, in the distant past, if you really love doing research, that's great. I feel one can't help but infuse some of what we know into our characters and into our scenarios. So, I have not been a restaurant hostess and I do not communicate with spirits, but some of Josie's thought patterns are mine and some of her, feelings and opinions are mine or similar to mine. And, I've certainly spent a lot of time in restaurants and with restaurant professionals. So I've studied and I've done a lot of research. I love researching for writing fiction. So I think it's really whatever speaks to an aspiring writer and, give it a try. And if it doesn't work out, my dog is running into the room as we speak. I apologize if you could hear that. If what you first try doesn't work so well, try something entirely different. The beauty of writing is there are no shortage of ideas. You can pick it up at any point. It's not something you have to have been doing from the time you were young. I think, writers get better with age, and wisdom and life experience. And, I encourage anyone who wants to write a book or wants to write period to do it. It's something you can really learn. The more you do it, the more you read, certainly, the better
Yes.
able you are to write. That's something we spoke about on our podcast. We just recorded our year-end podcast last week, and we talked about the importance of reading in order to be a better writer.
Yes. I think it helps with that creativity in your mind, and I would imagine too the sometimes the dangers of it. Just like being a podcaster, you
Hmm.
think you become the expert at all these topics, but you know, I think this is me personally thinking. If I was to be a writer, and I used to love writing, and used to,
Hmm.
is I can sometimes see a danger of if you're not somewhat experienced or if you're not a writer and you read something, not that you plagiarize, but boy, you take a lot of also that idea right from what you
Sure,
just read because it's familiar.
because
How
it's
do you not
familiar.
do that?
Well, that's a really interesting question. When I was writing The Coat Check Girl, a book came out called Sweet Bitter, which is set in the New York City restaurant world and has a cast of characters that included a brooding bartender and, an eccentric regular. And I heard about the book, and I had a brooding bartender and an eccentric regular. Somebody gave me a copy of the book. I very intentionally did not read it until I
Mm,
was done because I did not want to be accidentally influenced.
right.
There's something in the zeitgeist. First of all, a brooding bartender is not such an abnormal archetype, but there's something in the zeitgeist where I mean, right now there are a lot. I've been encountering more and more books set in restaurants, set in the hospitality industry. Um, I think reading things that are quite different from what you're writing, there's value in that. Um, and I've borrowed certainly not words or sentences, but I've been inspired by ways of describing things that I might not have
Oh,
thought of. I'm not using that language, but I'm thinking outside the box and thinking, well, how can I apply that principle of writing that this writer did so beautifully to my own work? Um, so I think, being so aware that you don't want to accidentally plagiarize, you'll be fine. I think it's when we are less aware of the possibility of being so directly influenced that we might run into some challenges.
all right. So I've got two big questions to ask then.
Uh-oh.
With the advent of all this AI, and we
Oh.
do know that people use that, um, uh, they abuse it, not use it, they
Mm-hmm.
abuse it.
Mm-hmm.
What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are I'm terrified. I know that it's here to stay. I have people in my life who are business owners, who are not writers, and who use it to write blog posts for their businesses. And I have to accept that. I mean, they inform it with an idea, and then I always say, as long as you're going through and reading and editing and not just posting what AI, what the robots write for you. Um, I don't love it, but not everybody is a writer, and I, I know that there are books, and there will continue to be books that people really write greatly with the help of AI, and to me, that is doing such a disservice to yourself as a creator. It's doing a great disservice to those of us who, really put our blood, sweat, and tears into our creative work. And
Yeah.
um, there's a clause in my and many other writers' contracts now that our work cannot be used to train AI. So I'm comforted by that. Um, I think it can be helpful. It's certainly helpful as a research tool. The Book of Reservations is set in the year 2000. Uh, when I want to research, what was personal technology like in the year 2000? What kinds of phones did we use? What kinds of, what internet service providers? What this? What that? AI can give me a very quick response. I verify everything, but it can
Hmm.
give me a quicker response than if I try to Google, a quicker and more encapsulated from information across the web. It can be useful for research. I would not use it for, I'd be very hesitant of using it to help me write a synopsis of my work, even though writing a synopsis can be more difficult than writing a novel sometimes. It's a really, really challenging exercise, but it would certainly be easy to feed my entire book into AI and ask it for a synopsis, but it would be taking away part of my responsibility as a writer, I feel.
Yeah, I agree with everything that you're saying about that. You don't want to have yourself as the author and then AI as a co-author.
No, you really don't. And, I think if you use it for any of your creative work, you risk like where do you then draw the line?
Yeah.
If you use it to come up with your taglines for your book, where do you draw the line? Um,
Well,
so
and
it
lazy, I think. You
yes.
get used to it all of a sudden. If you're a writer today and you're having a hard time doing things, and all of a sudden you go, "Oh wow, that worked out really great.
Hmm.
Whoa, that's another good one." Well, now you've not become a writer.
I agree. I mean, because yeah, passion. We don't get into this for the money or the fame, into novel writing. Most of us, anyway. So you really have to have a passion for storytelling and a passion
Yeah.
for the written word and a respect for the written word. And I just could never feel good about presenting work as my own that I didn't write in its entirety. I will admit I'm having some stuck moments with the third book in the trilogy right now. And I certainly could feed it all to AI and ask it to help me figure out the plot threads and this and that, but then I'm not doing the work. And then when somebody reads my book, they're not reading all of the effort that went into it. And that's part of the beauty of any piece of art, really, isn't it? Is knowing how much went into its creation.
Yeah. Yeah. It's, the one key word that you use that I think that the AI cannot replace is the storyteller. You are
Mm-hmm.
the storyteller. It's your story that you're telling, not somebody else, not somebody else's word that you're translating, but
Mm-hmm.
your story. So I think that's very, very important. I think with the AI, as far as a writer, it's fine to use it for um, grammatic errors, correcting
Sure.
grammar and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Though,
um,
as an editor and as a copy editor and a
oop,
bona fide word nerd, I like to do it all myself. I'm very and I like having, as far as I know, my publisher used a living, breathing copy editor for my work, and I kid because I know that they did. Um, and that a lot of the early jobs that I had in writing and editing are now being replaced by AI, and I understand it. And it's also such a shame because, there's a real skill to copy editing and proofreading that
yeah.
if we just decide it's obsolete and we don't need it anymore, that makes me sad. But I understand again, these business owners using it to proofread their blog posts. I can reluctantly accept that
Yeah,
and
yeah,
not fault them.
yes.
Yes, I love
Um,
editing. Um, and when I set a word goal of 1,500 words a day, I don't always meet it. Some days I go over it. Some days I go vastly under it. It evens out, which I appreciate. And I can't imagine, if I get to my 1,500 or more, feeling the same sense of satisfaction if my robot buddy helped me, and generated half of those.
yeah, even before the advent of AI and all this stuff that's making life easier or more complex, we used to hear the thing about um, it's you enjoy life or you like what you receive more if you earned it rather than if it was
Yes.
given to you. And this is that same, I'm going to imagine this is that same feeling or that same concept is you
I,
earned what you have.
absolutely, absolutely. Earning. I mean, that's an interesting tie into creativity, but absolutely, it is. It just feels much better to have earned it, and
Yeah.
I'm confident I will get through book three because I have to, and it is. There are blood, sweat, and tears going into it, and that's okay. That's part of the process. It's not. If it were easy, everybody would write a book. You know, if it were easy, everybody would host a show as you do. And, you know, it's, you know, I think they're valuing one's creative output is really important. And AI threatens that.